In July of 2024, the mountains of Glacier National Park spoke for the first time in 2 decades. The sound was not a whisper, but a roar, the percussive crack of an ancient ice shelf at Glasswater Lake surrendering to a warming world. A park ranger, dispatched to assess the geologic shift, found something the mountain had held secret. There, at the base of the newly sheared ice wall, was a human form, suspended in a coffin of near-perfectly clear ice. The body was pristine, a figure locked in time. It did not take long for identification. The face belonged to Sarah Jenkins, a 20-year-old geology student who had vanished during a whiteout blizzard in October of 2004. For 20 years, her story had a simple, tragic ending. She fell, and the glacier claimed her. But as the recovery team began their work, it became clear the mountain was not giving up a victim. It was revealing a crime scene. At that moment, the cold case of Sarah Jenkins, a file closed by an act of God, was officially reopened. October 2004. The air at Glasswater Lake was sharp, thin, and full of promise. Sarah Jenkins felt it with every breath. At 20, she was more than just a student. She was a geologist in the making, her eye for stratigraphy as keen as her photographer's sense of light. The University of Montana hiking club trip was, for her, a pilgrimage. She saw the ancient ice not as a landscape, but as a text, a story of pressure and time she was uniquely equipped to read. Her ambition was a quiet but intense force. While other students saw a challenging climb, Sarah saw an opportunity to document remote glacial formations, to capture images that would make her name. Her camera, a heavy 35mm model, was her most important tool. She moved with a cautious precision that belied her age, earning the respect of her peers and the trip's faculty supervisor, a charismatic young professor named Alistair Finch. He often remarked on her preternatural ability to spot details others missed. The day began under a sky of pale, indifferent blue. Sarah was in her element, lagging slightly behind the main group to frame a shot of compressed blue ice, her worn leather gloves protecting her hands from the biting cold. She spoke with Professor Finch about ice core data, her questions pointed, insightful. She was close to something, a geological inconsistency that didn't fit the accepted literature, Finch's literature. It was a conversation of academic curiosity, nothing more, or so it seemed. Then the weather turned. The wind, once a whisper, became a physical presence, tearing at their parkas. The sky dissolved from blue to a blinding, featureless white. The whiteout descended without warning, a sudden, suffocating curtain that erased the world. Visibility dropped to an arm's length. The group, once a cohesive unit, fractured into panicked, shouting voices, each one swallowed by the gale. Sarah's red jacket was a fleeting beacon, a momentary splash of color in the overwhelming gray. One student called her name and heard a faint reply, a single syllable whipped away by the wind. They saw her turn, perhaps toward a geological outcrop she had noticed earlier, moving with purpose even as the world disappeared around her. It was the last time anyone saw her. Then, there was only the sound of the storm. The shouting stopped, replaced by the howl of wind over ice. When the group finally managed to reconvene, huddled behind a rock outcropping, they were one person short. Contact was lost, not gradually, but instantly. The mountain had simply taken her. The silence that fell over the case for the next 20 years began in that moment, as profound and absolute as the snow that was now burying everything. The recovery of Sarah Jenkins's body was a slow, delicate surgical procedure performed on a scale of tons. Engineers and forensic specialists worked for 17 hours, using thermal lances and precision saws to carve the block of ice containing her from the glacier's frozen heart. It was transported under guard to the state medical examiner's facility in a climate-controlled vehicle, a moving tomb of glass-like ice. The world's media was already calling her the girl in the glacier, but for Detective Isabella Rossi of the Montana Division of Criminal Investigation, this was not a fairy tale. It was a crime scene, sealed for 2 decades. The thawing process was agonizingly slow, each droplet of meltwater a tick of a clock that had stopped in 2004. As the ice receded, the first impossibilities emerged. The parka Sarah wore was a vibrant, impossible blue. Its tags were crisp, the fabric showing no signs of 20 years of geological compression. It was a model from a popular outdoor brand's winter collection from 2023. In the pocket, sealed in a frozen block of its own, was a smartphone. An iPhone 14, a device that did not exist when Sarah Jenkins drew her last breath. The initial coroner's report landed on Rossi's desk like a gauntlet. It was a document of pure contradiction. The subject's cellular state was perfectly consistent with being flash frozen for 20 years. The lividity patterns and minor ice crystal damage to the tissues confirmed a long-term freeze. Yet the items found on the body were brand new, clean, impossible. The first key questions of the new investigation were not about a fall, but about a performance. Who staged this? Who had the motive and the means to climb to a remote, newly exposed ice shelf and dress a cryogenically preserved body in modern clothing? Where were the clothes she was actually wearing when she died? The gear meticulously listed in the 2004 case file. But there was more. Beneath the layers of impossibility, the pathologist found the first whispers of the original crime. Under her fingernails and deep in the frozen strands of her hair were microscopic fragments of dark blue wool. They did not match the synthetic parka. And on her upper arm, faint but distinct, was a patterned contusion. It was the ghost of a grip, bruising inconsistent with a simple, tragic fall into the snow. This was not the discovery of a lost hiker. It was the unearthing of a meticulously constructed lie. The scene was not an accident preserved in ice. It was a message, a deliberate act of misdirection designed to turn a murder investigation into a paranormal spectacle. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. This was not a crime of passion. It was an operation, planned with a cold and patient fury. To understand the lie, Detective Rossi first had to understand the silence. The original 19-page report from 2004 painted a picture not of malice, but of overwhelming, brutal nature. The search for Sarah Jenkins was launched within hours, but it was a study in futility. For 3 days, teams battled gale-force winds and sub-zero temperatures, their efforts swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape of the park. The official in charge of the operation was a rookie deputy named Marcus Thorne, a young man doing his best against an impossible situation. The key witness, naturally, was Professor Alistair Finch. He was the expert, the authority on the mountain and its moods. His testimony was the bedrock of the investigation. Distraught but composed, he provided a clear timeline, pinpointing the exact moment the whiteout hit and chaos descended. He guided the search parties, his expertise invaluable in navigating the treacherous terrain. He warned them away from the most unstable crevasse fields, citing the extreme danger of sending men into areas where the snowpack was a death trap. His caution was seen as professional, responsible. No one questioned it. The investigation lasted less than a week. The discovery of a single worn leather glove near the edge of a deep crevasse field was treated as the final piece of the puzzle. It was logged, photographed, and placed in an evidence bag, a sad confirmation of the only logical theory. Sarah, disoriented by the storm, had wandered too close to the edge and fallen. The mountain had taken her. It was a story as old as the peaks themselves. The case was closed. The verdict was unequivocal: death by misadventure. The university expressed its profound sorrow. The local community mourned the tragedy, and a grieving family was left with a narrative that, while heartbreaking, made a terrible kind of sense. There was no pressure from a shadowy corporation or a corrupt politician, but something far more insidious: a collective desire for a simple explanation. No one wanted to imagine anything worse than an accident. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of answers, It was an act of communal acceptance, a form of complicity that allowed a secret to be sealed in ice, waiting for the world to warm and the truth to finally break the surface. The present was a staged crime scene, a deliberate fiction. To find the truth, Detective Rossi had to excavate the past. She began with the living. The other students who survived the 2004 expedition were now in their early 40s, scattered across the country, their memories of that day encased in 20 years of adult life. Rossi interviewed 7 of them. Their accounts were a mosaic of faded fear and fragmented images. They remembered the sudden, shocking cold. They remembered the disorienting white of the blizzard. They remembered Professor Finch's calm authority in the face of chaos. But their memories of Sarah were different. They were sharp, vivid. They spoke of her intensity, her quiet ambition. 2 of them recalled her deep in conversation with Finch earlier that day, her questions about ice stratigraphy sounding less like a student's and more like a peer's. It was a ghost of a memory, unsubstantial, but it was consistent. They all remembered her focus, her almost obsessive need to understand the story the ice was telling. It was a story someone, it seemed, did not want told. Human memory, Rossi knew, was a fragile, imperfect archive. So she turned to an archive of paper and dust. For days, she immersed herself in the university's records from the early 2000s. She cross-referenced hiking club membership lists, equipment logs, and faculty travel authorizations. It was a monotonous, painstaking process of sifting through the mundane to find the anomalous. She read through Finch's academic output, his grant applications, and the peer reviews of his celebrated research, the very work that had made him a star in the geology world. The search led her from the main university library to a sub-basement storage facility for the Department of Sciences. Here, among forgotten dissertations and budget proposals, were the operational records of the geology labs. Box after box contained nothing but technician work logs, equipment calibration reports, and sample request forms, the bureaucratic skeleton of scientific inquiry. It was in a dusty, cloth-bound logbook for the university's cryo-storage facility that she found it. The entry was logged on October 5, 2004, the day before the hiking club departed for Glasswater Lake. The request was simple. A student sought access to archival ice core samples from the Henderson Glacier, the very same samples that were the foundation of Dr. Alistair Finch's groundbreaking paper on climate patterns. The student's name was Sarah Jenkins, and beside the entry, in the neat, sloping handwriting of a long-retired lab technician, was a second note, dated a week later. It read, "Request cancelled by Dr. Finch, post-expedition. Reason, student deceased." The story of the time-traveling hiker went viral with a speed that was almost chemical. It ignited the darkest corners of the internet and spilled into the mainstream, transforming the quiet town near Glacier National Park into a sideshow. A bizarre pilgrimage of ufologists, conspiracy theorists, and paranormal bloggers descended, their cameras and microphones turning a murder investigation into a public spectacle. The narrative was too tempting, too strange to be ignored. At the center of this storm was Sheriff Marcus Thorne. He gave measured, somber interviews, but his words were laced with a curious ambiguity. He spoke of the lake's strange properties, of unexplainable phenomena that had been local legend for years. He never endorsed the paranormal theories outright, but he nurtured them with carefully chosen phrases, subtly feeding the media frenzy. His performance was that of a man overwhelmed by a mystery beyond mortal comprehension. For Detective Rossi, the circus was not a mystery, it was a tactic. She was immune to tales of wormholes and temporal paradoxes. She dealt in motive and opportunity. She began to operate on a new, compelling theory. The paranormal narrative was a smokescreen, and Sheriff Marcus Thorne was the one holding the smoke generator. The elaborate staging of Sarah's body wasn't meant to create a paranormal mystery. It was meant to create a jurisdictional and logistical nightmare that would derail any real investigation. She theorized that Thorne was covering up a different crime entirely, perhaps illegal activity happening in the remote sections of the park, and Sarah's reappearance was a complication he was trying to neutralize. For 2 weeks, Rossi pursued this false lead. She quietly initiated a background check on Thorne, pulling his financial records and phone logs. She looked for connections to local criminal elements, for any sign of corruption that would explain his bizarre behavior. The theory was logical, grounded in a world of human greed and deception that Rossi understood well. It was a solid professional hypothesis, but it led absolutely nowhere. Sheriff Thorne's record was immaculate. His finances were mundane. There was no secret life, no hidden corruption. The theory collapsed under the weight of its own lack of evidence. Rossi had been so focused on the sheriff's current actions, on the why of the modern clothing, that she had been drawn into the very misdirection she was trying to uncover. Frustrated, she turned her attention away from the noise of the present and back to the silence of the past. Back to the small, sad collection of items from the original 2004 case file. Among them, sitting in a dusty evidence bag for 20 years, was a single leather glove. The false trail had cost Detective Rossi valuable time, but it had also served a purpose. It had cleared the board of all distractions. With the noise of the paranormal circus fading, she was left with only the cold, hard facts of the original case. The evidence box from 2004 was unsealed. Inside, nestled in yellowed paper, was Exhibit A, the single leather glove. It was stiff, the leather cracked from 20 years of dry storage, a forgotten relic of a day everyone thought they understood. In 2004, it had been a symbol of a tragic accident. In 2024, it became a Rosetta Stone. Rossi sent the glove to the state crime lab with a specific request: to subject it to every advanced forensic analysis that had been science fiction when it was first found. She was looking for a ghost, a trace of contact that had been invisible to the technology of the past. 2 weeks later, the lab report came back, and the entire case pivoted on 2 microscopic findings. First, the analysis of the glove's exterior had isolated a single dark blue wool fiber snagged in the stitching of a seam. Under a comparison microscope, it was a perfect, undeniable match to the fibers found in Sarah Jenkins's hair and under her fingernails. It was the physical link, the thread that connected Sarah's last struggle to this very object. She hadn't simply lost the glove, it had been torn from her grasp. Second, the inside cuff of the glove yielded the breakthrough. Trace amounts of epithelial cells, touch DNA left behind by an unknown male. In 2004, this would have been useless. Now, it was a genetic fingerprint. But it belonged to no one in any criminal database. It was a signature without a name. Rossi knew the name had to be in the case file. She went back not to the reports, but to the photographs, the grainy amateur snapshots taken by the other students on the hike. She scanned past smiling faces and stunning vistas, looking for a detail, and she found it. In a wide shot of the group resting before the blizzard, Sarah was not in the frame. But Professor Alistair Finch was, standing off to the side, deep in conversation. He was wearing a distinctive dark blue wool sweater. Suddenly, all the disparate pieces slammed together into a single, horrifying narrative. The ambitious student who had accessed Finch's ice core data, the private confrontation on the mountain, the faint, patterned bruising on Sarah's arm, the ghost of a grip, the struggle that left his DNA on her glove and his sweater's fibers on her body, the shove lost in the chaos of the sudden storm. The lab was able to secure a DNA sample from Dean Finch. The results were conclusive. The DNA from the glove was his. The motive was no longer a mystery. It was career annihilation, averted by a moment of panicked violence, buried under 2 decades of snow and silence. Based on the forensic evidence and the eventual confessions, the last hour of Sarah Jenkins's life can be reconstructed with chilling clarity. As the blizzard descended upon Glasswater Lake in 2004, visibility dropped and the group fractured. It was in this chaos that Sarah saw her chance for a private conversation with Professor Alistair Finch. Her voice was quiet, respectful, but her words carried the weight of scientific certainty. She had cross-referenced the university's archival ice core samples with his published data. She had found the flaw, the fabrication that was the foundation of his entire career. Finch's world fractured in that moment. His reputation, his future, the very identity he had built for himself, was about to be undone by a 20-year-old student with a sharp mind and a camera full of evidence. He argued, he deflected, but Sarah stood her ground. The argument grew heated, their voices lost to the wind for anyone else. It was then, in a surge of cold, absolute panic, that his academic reason failed him, and a primal instinct for survival took over. His hands shot out in a single violent push. The impact was jarring. Sarah stumbled backward, her feet finding no purchase on the slick, snow-dusted ice. She was at the edge of a hidden crevasse, a deep fissure masked by a thin bridge of snow. For a fraction of a second, she was silhouetted against the whiteout, arms flailing for a balance that wasn't there. Then she disappeared into a fissure of deep blue shadow. The storm swallowed her single sharp cry. Finch stood, his heart hammering against his ribs, listening. He heard nothing more. In that ringing silence, he made a choice. He turned his back on the crevasse and walked away, letting the storm become his alibi. For 20 years, that choice paid off. Alistair Finch became Dean Finch, a celebrated academic pillar. Then, in July of 2024, his carefully constructed world received a phone call. The Glacier had surrendered its secret. His first call was not to a lawyer, but to his old friend, Sheriff Marcus Thorne. In a frantic, terrified confession, he laid out the truth. Thorne, bound by a twisted sense of loyalty and a desire to protect his friend and his town from scandal, made his own fateful choice. Their plan was desperate, but meticulously executed. It was Thorne who purchased the 2023 Parka and the iPhone 14 in cash, 2 towns over. Under the cover of darkness, the two men hiked to the remote ice shelf where Sarah's body lay exposed. What followed was a grim, silent ritual. In the cold mountain air, they performed a macabre violation, removing the frozen, weather-beaten clothes of the past and replacing them with the impossible fabrics of the present. They placed the phone in her pocket, a final, anachronistic touch designed to create a puzzle so baffling it would obscure a simple, ugly truth. They took her original clothing and gear, burning them later that night. The paranormal spectacle that captivated the nation was nothing more than a desperate echo, a lie created to hide a 20-year-old shove. Armed with the lab report from a 20-year-old glove, Detective Rossi's first stop was not the university, but the sheriff's office. She laid out the evidence for Marcus Thorne not as an accusation, but as an established sequence of events. The dark blue wool fibers, the DNA, the impossibly new parka. She watched as the sheriff's carefully constructed composure disintegrated under the weight of cold, scientific fact. His confession was not an emotional outburst, but a quiet, methodical surrender. He detailed the panicked phone call from Finch, the misguided plan, the grim hike in the dark, and the desecration of Sarah Jenkins's body. The arrest of Dean Alistair Finch took place in his university office, a room lined with accolades and books that were a testament to a life built on a deadly secret. Faced with Thorne's signed confession and the irrefutable DNA evidence, his 2 decades of silence broke. He confessed to the argument, the shove, and the decision that had haunted every achievement of his professional life. The celebrated geologist, the respected Dean of Sciences, was gone. In his place was a man who had traded a young woman's life for his career. The trials were swift. The media narrative, once obsessed with paranormal theories, now feasted on a story of academic fraud and cold-blooded betrayal. Alistair Finch was charged with murder. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Marcus Thorne, for his role in the cover-up, was convicted of felony obstruction of justice and tampering with physical evidence. His career, his reputation, and his freedom ended with a sentence of 10 years in a state penitentiary. For Sarah Jenkins's family, the verdicts brought not closure, but a different kind of pain. For 20 years, they had mourned a daughter lost to the indifferent power of nature. They had made a fragile peace with an act of God. The truth forced them to grieve all over again, this time for a daughter who had been murdered, her memory then violated and twisted into a national spectacle. Legal justice had been served. The system had provided names, motives, and consequences. The files were stamped, the sentences were being carried out, and the case was officially closed for a second and final time. But the resolution offered by a courtroom cannot mend a wound that has festered for 2 decades. It can only confirm its depth. Glasswater Lake is quiet again. The glacier that served as both a tomb and a vault has receded further, the landscape of 2024 already a memory being erased by the slow, relentless melt. The specific crevasse that held Sarah Jenkins is gone, reformed into a new, anonymous geography of ice and rock. A small bronze plaque, installed by the university as an act of public penance, now stands near the trailhead. It bears her name, her dates, and a simple dedication to her love of geology. The tools of the Great Deception have been catalogued and retired. The impossible parka and the phone that defied time now sit in a climate-controlled evidence vault, their serial numbers logged in a database. They are no longer clues to a cosmic anomaly, but artifacts of a desperate human lie. In prison, Alistair Finch is no longer a dean or a doctor. He is an inmate, a man whose entire life of achievement was an epilogue to a single, panicked shove. The world was eager to believe in a miracle of physics to avoid confronting the banality of a man's fear. For a few weeks, the story of Sarah Jenkins was a thrilling paradox, a mystery for the ages that promised to rewrite the rules of reality. But the truth, when it was finally unearthed, was a much older story. It wasn't about the strange properties of time or space. It was about the simple, brutal weight of a secret and the desperate, pathetic measures taken to keep it buried. The mountain no longer holds a secret. It simply is. And the silence that hangs over the water is no longer heavy with a question. It is the profound, empty silence that follows an answer.